Okay, go for it. Hi, I'm Brian O'Keefe with Catch Magazine. Oftentimes we'll fish our home water rivers where we're very familiar with how to get there, what time to be there, what to use, but there's still enough water, a little bit more off the beaten path that needs to be explored. Sometimes it might be okay, moderately productive or very productive, but it's that exploring and being willing to hike in or float a long ways, even drive a long ways or fly a long ways. And those places tend to be the trips that you remember your whole life because they're just memorable because of incredible scenery, maybe the people you meet or not seeing anybody at all. It takes a little bit of dedication, takes a little discipline to actually want to break out of the mold of fishing my well-known water that I fished all my life and experiment and try new places. The river we're on originates at the very top of a mountain range, and there's glaciers and snowpack that melts and forms these creeks and streams. And some of them carry just a little bit of that glacial coloration. It's kind of a blue-gray. Now that river can clear up to be absolutely crystal clear, but when we were there was just a little of that kind of snow melt coloration. The fish were still acting very trouty. They were rising. And when we saw rising fish, it was great to get in position to make the cast to those fish. But when they weren't, we pretty much just fished ideal trout water. A little bit deeper runs, some big boulders for protection, overhanging trees, and just seams and good riffles that trout like. There was plenty of water that was nice, but it just didn't hold fish. It was shallow, and there was eagles and osprey there that could just pick off fish. So they tended to be around some cover, rocks, and overhanging banks for protection. So sometimes we would just fish good-looking water with bigger attractor dry flies. And other times, when we saw rising fish, we'd go to smaller parachute patterns and drift them right into those feeding lanes and catch them. As we hiked up and down the river, you saw all those spawning kokanee in the back channels and those nice quiet riffles. And really that river's got a lot of bears, and it reminded me so much of fishing in Alaska. We have the Alaska brown bear and a lot of these spawning sockeye that bring trout up with them, which makes such a great fishery in Bristol Bay area. But here we have rainbows and cutthroats that follow the kokanee. And these are nice kokanee. They're probably about an 18 to 20 inch average. So it's a small salmon. And you get all those fish coming up, which provide, food for the eagles and the bears. And then when they spawn, providing food for the rainbows and cutthroat. It's a great cycle, and it usually means you're going to catch some bigger fish. So you have to sort of train your eye to look at all these red fish, but every once in a while there's just a shape or a shadow of a nice rainbow or a cutthroat. I'm talking like a 16 to 20 or 22 inch fish. They blend in, they've got great camouflage, but that water's clear enough to spot them, and then you can get in position and try to catch them. This river changes with the seasons like most trout waters do. It runs really strong and high in the spring and early summer from melting glaciers, and then gets kind of more stabilized in the summer, slowly drops into the fall and clears up more. Consequently, fish move around a little bit and have different opportunities to feed on nymphs and sculpins and then dry flies and terrestrials. A river like this, it's very hard to get to. I'm not going to be fishing it every weekend, so it's maybe once a year or every other year. So I'm not, totally dialed into what's happening all the time. When we're searching good-looking water, not seeing rising fish, but searching good-looking water, sometimes we had to change flies a half a dozen times. We went through parachutes and comparadons and some rubber leg stimulators, some bigger tractor flies. And finally, boom, we would find something that would really trigger a strike. And that fly would stay good for 2 or 3 fish, and then sure enough, it'd kind of go dead. And we'd change back to a smaller fly or more of a terrestrial like an ant or a cricket, and boom, that would happen. And we just kind of went from pattern to pattern down the river as we hiked around, and never had one fly that just worked consistently all day, but we kept changing them up and kept catching fish, which was really fun. On wilderness rivers like this, especially up high in the mountains, you get a lot of big boulders, and the big rocks create seams on both sides and eddies, and they're just a great place to look for fish. Sometimes directly in front of the rocks where it's kind of scoured out and there's a really good place to hide, along the sides and in the seams. Sometimes in the actual swirling eddy right behind the rock isn't that great of a spot. It's nice to maybe run a streamer through water like that, but for dry fly fishing, it's the seams and the head of the rock.
So you see that little guy?
Yeah, slasher.
Yeah.
Generally, in mountain rivers that are really cold and have kind of a short prime season, you don't get a lot of really, really big fish. The native and resident trout in this river are nice fish. They're 8 to 15 inches and so, but because there's a large lake at the bottom, and that's where the kokanee and even some landlocked Chinook salmon move upriver, well, there's also big trout that come up, so there's chances of big fish. But to hike into a place like that, I'm not going to bring too much tackle, so I took a 9-foot 4-weight, which is perfect for the resident fish. If I catch a really big one, I can run downstream and fight him and that sort of thing. It's a pretty strong, quick action rod, because there's areas on that river where there was some longer cast required. So it wasn't a slow action or soft rod, more of Spring Creek style. It was pretty much a modern fast action 9-foot 4-weight, weight forward floating line. And my leader tippet combination is probably 9 to 10 feet total. Fishing around 4X size is just kind of perfect for that area. Even some of the bigger fish we caught, it was open water, not a lot of snags and log jams. We'd really have to horse a fish out of there. We had the luxury of longer riffles and runs to fight fish in, but we still want to get them in the net, release them and revive them. So that rod worked really well. And it can cast bigger flies, hopper size flies, but it's just perfect for size 14s and 16s, sort of match the hatch style fishing. Like a lot of trout streams, this river branched several times and even braided into 2 or 3 channels as it changes its course through high water and floods and things like that. And some of those back channels were literally completely covered with overhanging trees and vegetation. Sometimes we had to kind of crawl in there and just cast sidearm. Your standard 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock is great on open water, but all you gotta do is tilt that rod to 45 degrees or absolutely parallel to the water. Keep the same stop positions, 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, just laid over flat. And that'll send your loop right into these tight pockets under trees and flip that fly right in there where the fish are just hanging out, eating ants and anything else that's drifting down their way. Probably one of the most effective casts on a trout stream like we're on is a reach cast. It's very common. It's basically when you aim at a target from a slightly upstream position, and while the line and fly is approaching your target, you sweep the rod upstream and over, and that allows your upstream line to move in the fast current and match the speed and the drift of your drawing. It extends your drift, especially fishing to the bank. It's a great technique out of drift boats, and when you're wading, you can do a reach cast and then move your rod back downstream and shake out slack and extend your drift down a bank. And in some cases, we're Fishing to rising fish we couldn't wade to, really closer than 40 or 50 feet. And by making a long reach cast and then shaking out slack, you can actually fish to a rising fish 60 or 70 feet away because you've got a dead drift going downstream because you've positioned your line properly to get a long float. Many times, having a net is really nice, especially when they're a little bit larger fish. And cutthroat,
Nice.
man, they're kind of hard to land. They're really super slippery. Their scales are so fine.
That's a sweet fish.
It almost feels just like smooth skin without scales. They're hard to hold. So sliding them into especially a catch and release style net is really nice. They kind of get subdued in there. You can take the fly out, do a revive and a release without a lot of drama and fish thrashing on rocks, that sort of thing. It's just very, very handy. This is the kind of place where having the right footwear is really important. I mean, you saw how we were scrambling over boulders, doing some deep wading, up and down trails in the rainforest. So this is a spot where, man, you really want to know that your boots fit well and are comfortable for miles and miles and all day or multiple day use. Taking maybe a pair of brand new boots in that are untested could result in some blisters and sore feet. So make sure you've got a few miles on your boots. And in a place like this where we're scrambling over rocks and things, the felt soles were really nice. And they were just comfortable and durable and had a lot of support. You pretty much stay in the water most of the time, hiking along the gravel bars, but then crossing at the tailouts and just zigzagging downstream or up by crossing the river to get to your next spot. So sometimes I fish with a fanny pack or chest pack, but in this case I picked a little shorty minimalist vest just because I had enough room for all my stuff, a small little bit of food, and when I crossed in really deep water, I just had to kind of worry about getting across the other side without all my stuff getting wet. We had the combination of observing all the kokanee and even some landlocked Chinook salmon, but we were there to catch cutthroat and rainbows on dry flies. The West Slope cutthroat is just a gorgeous fish. They have a lot of spots from the dorsal fin back to the tail, like a lot of cutthroats, beautiful golden hues, and those bright red slashes under its jaw. They're absolutely gorgeous. A lot of times we fish rainbows and browns and other fish, and really to catch nice size cutthroat trout in a wild environment like that is absolutely a treat.